episode 3 of the Bruni Brocast. The name of this episode, Adam first had the name. It was
Nihilist or not.
Nihilist or not, and then I had
Nietzsche,
the idea.
Nihilist or not, yeah.
Nietzsche, Nihilist or not, and then I had the idea, Nihilist it or leave it. So today's episode, we're going to be focusing a lot on the teachings of Nietzsche, especially because, over this past holiday, Adam has been reading a lot about Nietzsche, especially the maxims and arrows, and I've spent the past couple days going down a Nietzsche rabbit hole myself. And I also think that it works really well with where we left off in our last episode. Because our last episode, we left off talking about the simulacrum and like what's real and what's not real and what matters and what doesn't matter. And I think these are the kinds of questions that Nietzsche is interested in.
Yeah, for sure.
It's less about like what is right and more about like, or no, I guess it is about more what is right. I guess he just has an interesting way of seeing things, and a lot of people misconstrue him as being kind of like a nihilist, right? That's like kind of a frequent.
Yeah. That's the common interpretation from what I've seen is Nietzsche as a sort of depressing, nihilistic kind of thinker. When in reality, there isn't a lot of hope to a lot of the things that he's saying, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily nihilistic.
Why do you think that that's what people think about him, though? Like, could you point to something?
I'd have to think about that for a second, but
okay.
I think it definitely just has to do with his tone when he's talking about things. I feel like he has a very like confident to a fault kind of tone when he talks, and it just makes it seem like, the negative things that he's saying are like much more negative than they really are. You know what I mean?
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. I think
he's an extremely confident thinker from what I've read of him.
And his confidence is so high that he sees it fit to tackle very negative problems. I think, and that's maybe where it comes from, because instead of going after things that are positive in nature, Nietzsche uses his own confidence and his own, rationality. Or maybe, he'd argue that he doesn't like rationality all that much, but he uses his own intellect to combat really harsh, really negative problems. So I can see why people think that he's kind of a nihilist and that he believes in maybe nothing. I think what Nietzsche believes in is a world where everyone believes in themselves. Funny enough, I think that's actually what he wants.
Yeah, he definitely does not like the idea of like group thinking. He definitely is a big proponent of everybody kind of finding their own truth, right?
Finding their own voice, finding their own truth, speaking their own voice, and not being afraid of whether that ostracizes them or even makes them friends. Because ultimately, not everyone will always like you.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've got
Nietzsche definitely knew that not everyone was going to like him.
Oh,
so.
Nietzsche's very very highly disliked.
He definitely knew. No, but he knew that.
Oh, of course he knew. Didn't he like live like a hermit?
Yeah, he literally did. In the later parts of his life, he literally lived alone. I'm pretty sure.
Let's talk a little bit about the man before we get into the arguments. Nietzsche lived in Germany in the 18 and 1900s. He didn't have a very successful love life. He had a pretty unsuccessful love life.
There's a funny story there.
Yeah, what's the story? I think Adam was telling me
the story. I think I was telling you that I read that he proposed to the same woman like 3 times.
Oof.
And she said no 3 times.
I feel like, after the second time, like, the first time, like, maybe it wasn't the right moment.
And they were still friends after that or something like that. It's just funny. It's just funny to me.
Yeah, the ultimate friend zone was Nietzsche.
So that's a little nihilist. That's a bit of a nihilism inducer right there, if I would say so.
Oh, for sure. And like maybe, I don't know. I don't think that he's truly nihilistic, but certainly being turned down by the same woman 3 times that you love, and she obviously doesn't love you back, is pretty
he certainly would have good reason to be a nihilist, I think.
Certainly.
He would have good reason. But so I still don't think he is, though.
I think one reason why Nietzsche works really good with our last episode is because last episode we talked a lot about the history of philosophy, and we mentioned the Greeks. We talked a lot about the Greeks and Socrates and Plato, and Nietzsche comes at a point, thousands of years later, and Nietzsche is not very much of a fan of Socrates and Plato. He's actually kind of a rival.
Yeah, he's really not a big fan of them.
He's quite a critic, actually, of Plato's and Socrates, which surprisingly, like amongst philosophy, they are not subject to much critique, Plato and Socrates. Like, I mean, not much like widespread critique.
Yeah.
Usually they're kind of the forefathers of the whole thing, so they're not really attacked very often.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say too. Like, people see them as kind of the creators of philosophy, so to an extent they're a little infallible in that aspect. But Nietzsche definitely doesn't have a problem doubting a lot of the things that they say and doubting the reasons why they did some of the things that they did, which other philosophers definitely don't really do.
I think I want to start with one of the most interesting things that I found when reading about Nietzsche, which is he has this point, okay? And his point is, at the time of Greek philosophy, a lot of the most smartest of people shared this common belief that life is worthless. That was the common belief, right? And Nietzsche comes and says that this idea that this common belief that life is worthless is not true, first off, and second off, is a symptom of a society that is, or a social consciousness that is in decline. So he says that because the social consciousness of Greece was in decline, that affected the actual headspace of Socrates, of Plato, right? To feel negatively about life, because that negativity reflected the decay of the Greek Empire
of Athens.
Exactly, that was happening in their era. Like in their era, they saw the decay of what was once the great Greek Empire, the bastion of democracy and rationality and free will. They were there witnessing almost like the end of that, or the dismantling of that. And so Nietzsche says, because they existed in that time, and because they then influenced the rest of philosophy for basically thousands of years, we have this philosophical predisposition that life is worthless.
Yeah.
And that is not where you should be starting.
We at least have the presupposition that philosophy is attempting to prove why life doesn't have the value that we necessarily attribute to it. But Nietzsche comes at it from the opposite perspective. He's like, why can't philosophy give meaning to life, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what he's trying to say. He's trying to say that, like, what if we just came at philosophy with the common perception that life is worth something, right? Like, why? Because if we did that, a lot of systems would have to change. A lot of things would change in like all of philosophy. And so he says that one of his theses is that happiness and instinct are the same thing.
Wait, say that again. What?
One of the things that he puts forward in the book Twilight of the Idols is so he says this: happiness and instinct are one, but reason stands in opposition to instinct. So what that means to me is that our happiness and our instincts are the same thing. Our instincts are like what tells us what to do, like what should we do, right? But then, much like our brain always does, our reason stands in opposition to our instinct. So our brain tells our heart, don't do this. Maybe you shouldn't do this. Maybe there's reasons you should wait. Maybe there's reasons you should reevaluate, right? It's a way to analogize this, I think, for the average person is that
analogize.
Well, no, like an analogy for this is that, like, your heart could tell you to love somebody, right? And that's your instinct. And then your head could tell you no, and that's your reason, right?
Yeah, and one of those two things would make you happy. And it's pretty obvious which one that is, right?
Well, if
loving somebody as an instinct would make you happy, right? And I think that's kind of what he's saying.
Exactly. What he's trying to say is that you could always let your reason stop you from getting your happiness.
Being happy, yeah.
But if you always worked off your instincts, even if you didn't succeed 100% of the time, you would find happiness because you tried.
I think you're also seeing it from only one perspective, though.
Okay.
You have to see it from the idea that your instinct is also so your instinct is something that is, born into yourself, right?
Yeah.
So isn't he also kind of saying that there is no way to like create happiness? Like happiness only comes from the instinctual habits that humans have.
I think he's trying to say that happiness comes from doing the things that your instincts are telling you to do. Like following your gut is what brings
But
you
does
happiness.
instincts mean like primal instincts?
No, I would argue that instincts are deeper than just the primal instincts that we
When
have.
I first read that, I thought he meant like primal instincts. But philosophers like this are very tough to read because, well, philosophers in general are very tough to read because you don't know exactly the thought that they have that's behind the word. Because in philosophy, it's much more than just the word, right?
Yes, of course.
Like when he says instinct, he could mean primal instinct, or he could mean like instinct, like your gut feeling, which is primal but also could grow. You know what I mean?
Well, and this is how I see primal instincts, right? Like instincts began as a primal thing. It started with like, I see a bear, my instinct is to run because the bear is bigger than me, right? But then as humanity developed language and culture and systems and simulacrums, if you want to see it that way, our instincts and the things that we were instinctually kind of tipped off about also changed, right? Because no longer were we encountering bears in the forest and having to fight for our lives. Now we were listening to people say things and disagreeing with them. Very different circumstances occurring, but both require instinct, right? Because if you hear someone and disagree with them, that is usually your instinct telling you that you disagree. And then your reason might break down why you actually disagree, but your instinct is where it starts from. And this is one thing that I feel very strongly about is that you can disagree with something with your heart before you can realize why you disagree with it with your head. Right. And I think like one example of this is like how I disagree about, liberties being taken away from people, like human liberty. Right. Like that doesn't sit well with my heart. Every time that I hear about people losing civil liberty or not being given civil liberties, that hurts my heart. That instinctually gets me fired up and ready to fight. Right. But in my head, I haven't necessarily figured out why that is or even why the civil liberties are not being given. It's just that internal feeling that I get that fires me up. Adam's thinking.
And I think that you might not be looking at it from, so instincts, you're saying instincts could be developed because we had to develop our instincts from, basic primal instincts to instincts that have to do with society, like societal instincts and intuitions.
Well, much like our brains and our bodies have primal instincts because at one time a bear would eat us. Now we have instincts that are not just primal because our existence is no longer just primal. We have more of an educated existence now as human beings in the 21st century.
So then why is our rationalism opposing that?
I think our rationality symbolizes our own self-doubt, and I think it symbolizes our own just fright for doing the things that might be right, because the things that are right are often the hardest things to do, right? And like the instincts that we have are often the hardest things to act on. When you think about like an instinct, like you have a girl that you have a crush on, you have to ask her on a date, right? Like that is you instinctually feel like you want to do that, but that's a difficult thing to do. And then your reason kicks in and your reason says, well, what if she doesn't like you? What if she doesn't find you attractive? What if she thinks you're weird? What if all these different things, right? So your reason stands in this direct opposition to your instinct because your instinct's telling you, I like this girl. I want to ask her on a date. I think we get along. And your reason is standing in the way. I mean, that's just an example, but I think it kind of applies to the scenario.
Yes, but I kind of disagree with either your construing of this idea or Nietzsche's idea itself. I kind of disagree with the fact that rationality stands against intuition. If you're talking about intuition as, like societal, like ingrown intuition, like I think
I think intuition and instinct is different.
Don't they kind of work in tandem with each other?
Intuition and instinct?
Instinct and rationality. Sorry, I don't know if I was clear before.
They work in tandem, but they work against each other, dude. Like they are opposite forces, right? It's like and then if you take like
But I disagree. Your rationality can tell you that this is the right thing to do, and your instinct could tell you that it's not, right?
But wouldn't that be just believing in your own instinct?
No, that would be what that would be believing in your rationality.
If your rationality tells you that your instincts
Let's
are
say
right,
okay, Steven, let's say that you believe that the Earth is flat, right?
Okay.
Your instinct is telling you that the Earth is flat, right?
Okay.
If you use rationality to find out that the Earth is not flat,
yeah,
like
I'm following.
Right? Like, what's the exact quote from Nietzsche? What is he saying? Like,
he says, "Happiness and instinct are one, but reason stands in direct opposition to instinct." That's the quote that I have.
Okay, then I guess the flat Earth doesn't have anything to do with that. But
I don't know. I guess you could have an instinct that's wrong, but then hold the phone. He's not talking about whether your instincts
he's
are
not talking
wrong
about right and
or
wrong. He's talking about
happiness. He's talking about happiness, right? So he's saying that you are most happy.
This is why it's important to go back. That's why I asked you, like, wait, like, can I go back to the text for a second? Because I actually forgot what I was arguing against.
Yeah. So it's
I don't understand.
So I think when you look at it through the lens of happiness and sadness, he's right. If you don't do the things that you want to do because your head tells you not to, you're not going to be happy, right? So reason stands in direct opposition to instinct, but then because of that, because of the relationship between instinct and happiness, reason also can stand in opposition to happiness. Right? Like if you're too reasonable and you think too much, you could stop yourself from being happy. Because being happy is just sometimes doing those things that require a little bit of risk. And you know how I feel about taking risks.
Yeah, I know how you feel about taking risks. Tell the people how you feel about taking risks.
So one thing, Adam and I talk all the time, and I happened to be back in Markham in our parents' house for the holidays, and so we had plenty of talks in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., both awake and just talking about life and stuff like that. No, it's the truth. And I always tell him,
don't expose us.
One of the things I always tell him is that, roll the dice. If you think that something might work, roll the dice. Like, what's the worst that can happen? You can roll, if you take it into Dungeons and Dragons terms, you can have a critical failure and you could never do it ever again, but at least you tried. And
called rolling a 1.
That's rolling a 1 out of 20. Or you can roll a 20, which is a critical success, and you could do something awesome and then be like, holy shit, I did something that's really great and I'm so proud of myself. Or you could roll a 10 or a 15 out of 20, right? Which is, you do something and maybe it was kind of good, maybe it was kind of bad, but in doing it, you learn how to do it better next time, right? So it is like this constantly improving thing. But if you never play the game, if you never roll the dice, you never even get to somewhere where you can start being better. You just always...
Steven is reiterating Wayne Gretzky quotes.
Absolutely, bro.
You missed 100% the shot you don't take.
Like Wayne Gretzky was completely correct in that quote, though.
I remember seeing that in like elementary school, and it was like Wayne Gretzky. I'm like, are you sure Wayne Gretzky said that? I'm like, I'm not 100% sure that he said that.
Well, Michael Scott said that. Michael Scott said that Wayne Gretzky said it. So
yeah,
would Michael Scott lie to you?
No, I guess not.
No,
I guess
he didn't lie once in the whole series of The Office.
He's such an authority on that matter.
He's an authority on the matter of Wayne Gretzky quotes. I'm drinking Galvanina, by the way. Shout out to you can't even see it on my screen. Galvanina, sparkling Italian water.
I can't see it. I can't see you.
The people can see it.
I'm talking to a screen.
The people could see my bottle.
The people could see it.
Yeah,
I'll see it when I rewatch the tapes.
So when we move forward with Nietzsche, he then talks about some interesting, and this gets like really abstract now. He talks about how previous philosophers have fictionalized the apparent world, and then he says that casts the senses into doubt and removes the concept of what the real world is. And that's the thing with the wise and the pious man. Did you check that out?
What do you think he's trying to say there?
Well, I think what he means by fictionalizing the apparent world, I think he's trying to say that a lot of philosophers take too many logical leaps when trying to arrive at what reality is.
Oh, this one's deep.
And I think what he's trying to say is that
Oh,
instead of taking all those logical leaps to lead you to what reality is, I think what he's trying to say is that the concept of the real world is that it's nuts and it's anarchy and there is like not really any actual rules and like, you know, like we have
he
laws
says
in place.
exactly. The idea of a real world has become useless. It provides no consolation or motive. It is therefore cast aside as a useless abstraction. What world is left? The concept of the real world has been abolished, and with it, the idea of an apparent world follows. What do you think that means? What's an apparent world? I think I kind of understand that.
I think and this is again like it is so abstract, but I think what he's trying to say is that the concept of the real world is dead. The real world is this thing where like anything can happen, anyone can do anything, and you really can't police anyone. Like you can try to, but you can't necessarily be too proactive, right? Like, for example, some people can get together and say that they're part of some terrorist organization and they can do something terrible to people, right? And like that could be illegal, but in the real world that happens because that is a possibility in the world that we live in, right? And so I think what he's trying to say is that we take so many presuppositions when we're trying to come at a conclusion of what the apparent world is that we've forgotten that the apparent world shouldn't actually like matter that much. We should care more about the real world because that's like the reality of it all. The apparent world is like what we think we see, but it's like the Wizard of Oz.
I think of him saying the apparent world as like the obvious world.
Exactly. It's like
where everything's obvious.
Well, okay, think about the Wizard of Oz. Like, you know, they all see what they see. They don't see the witch behind the curtain. Right? They see the apparent world.
This is the idea of the simulacrum, right?
I think it's a similar idea to the simulacrum is that like you see what the world displays and the apparent world is believing that whatever you see as the world is what the world is. And then the real world is like what's actually behind that, which is the anarchy that is a planet with like 6 or 7 billion free thinking individuals. Like that is anarchic as an idea, right? But we don't see it that way. Though truthfully it is that way. There's 7, 8, 9 billion human beings, and we all have the capacity for free rational thought, and we all have the capacity to do like a lot of crazy things, good things, bad things, hedonistic things. Like we can do anything.
Yeah.
And there's 7 billion of us. And I think he's trying to say that like we've forgotten that. And how he argues it is that he says that religion has helped us forget what the real world is.
Yeah, it makes sense, kind of.
So he insists that the Christian religion is blasphemous and that it is rebellion against life.
Well, think about it this way. Doesn't religion attempt to make all of the world the apparent world, like the obvious world, right?
Exactly.
It makes all of your actions obvious. Like, are they sins or are they not sins? That's the lens in which you see the world, right? I'm not saying that's a bad lens, but it is like it's an apparent world lens. It is an obvious world lens to live.
Religion
life
is
through.
the apparent world. Like
yes.
what you see on the news is the apparent world. Religion is the apparent world, right? Because it has given you these rules to live by in a system that actually like at its base level doesn't have any rules.
Yes.
And that's what Nietzsche's trying to say. Like the more you forget that there is no rules, the more you live your life according to somebody else's rules, and that is not good for your happiness and for your instinct.
And you know what he says about systematizers, right?
What is he? What is a systematizer first?
Oh, a systematizer is simply someone who lives their life through the lens of a system, right?
Okay. Yeah. Let's travel down this road then. So what does Nietzsche talk about the people who are systematizers?
He says, I mistrust all systematizers and avoid them. The will to a system is a lack of integrity.
Oh, baby.
So this is exactly what he's saying, like in what we were just talking about too, if you think about it.
It's totally the same. If you're willing
It's
to
all
give
linked
up
because it's all one person's thought, right?
exactly, if you're willing to give up your autonomy to a system
To
and
live in the apparent world.
1 second, let me finish this thought. If you're willing to give up your autonomy to live within a system and let the system dictate how you live your life, then he's arguing that you've forgotten your instincts. You've completely forgotten what it is to have your own personal instincts, and instead you've relegated yourself to only living in the apparent world instead of following your instincts, being happy, and living in the real world.
And that's integrity.
And that is losing integrity.
That's your integrity as a person. That's exactly what integrity means.
You should maintain your integrity by being a free thinker and by only upholding the things that you agree in, and also and then also on the flip side, debating and trying to break down the things you don't believe in. Like that.
But I don't agree with him. I don't agree with him that that we need to forego our rationality to achieve like some kind of happiness, though.
I see, and this is, I think,
because I think rationality has a lot to do with your integrity. No, with integrity. I
think rationality and integrity are definitely have some linkages and some connections, but I also think that reason does stand in opposition to happiness, because what you can think in your mind, what will make you happy. In the analogy that I gave, it's like what would make that person happy would be to go on a date with that girl, right?
Or that guy.
So reason is something that stands in opposition to your happiness, and whether that affects your integrity or not is a different question. But
is it though? I mean, I guess we're kind of getting too deep into this one specific thought. But
I agree. But are you showing your own integrity if you deny yourself the ability to even ask a girl on a date or a guy on a date? Is that like?
I think it's more complicated than all these examples that we're giving. I think it's more complicated. I think we could spend 3 hours talking about that.
We could spend 3 hours talking about any one of the dozens of quotes that we have on.
And that's the problem with Nietzsche. Every single sentence that he has is just like mind blowing. It's like you can spend so much on like one paragraph. And that's kind of what I love about him, though.
Okay, so
you can tell that he's just sat and thought about these things. He just sat on them for so long, and he's finally just kind of like letting them out. That's what it seems like to me.
There is one, like there's this little passage that I have, and I thought that this was like actual word gold. And he said, and it says this: Nietzsche concludes that insisting people ought to be one way and not another leads to a form of bigotry. This bigotry devalues the goodness of human diversity, the enchanting wealth of all types. Also, the belief that people can truly change their nature disregards the fact that any person is a piece of fate. It is not possible for a person to divorce him or herself from the past events or present circumstances of their life that cause them to be who they are. So Nietzsche believes that you cannot change your nature because your nature is the sum of your history and your present. I totally agree with that. But then he also says that when people start insisting that people be one way or another, they go down this path of bigotry. And this bigotry devalues a very core good aspect of humanity, which is human diversity. And I think we can really apply this to the modern times that we're living in. To say that you are a piece of fate, therefore you have your own specific past, you have your own specific present. You alone bear that. You alone bear your past and your present.
It's a kind of famous argument. Part of it's pretty famous, like even before Nietzsche, I think. The idea of you ought to be a certain way. It's a famous philosophical term, like you ought to do, like there's a problem with the word ought, right? Do you see the problem with the word ought or no?
Well,
or do you not see the problem?
Yeah, like the problem with the word ought is you're trying to force your agency on somebody else.
It's like you ought to be this way. Well, why? Should I ought to be that way?
Because you say so?
What's the ought there mean?
The ought is an appeal to authority. You ought to be this way because I don't like a system where you're not that way.
Exactly, but it's like phantom authority, right? It's like a logical fallacy. I think it is a logical fallacy.
But what Nietzsche is saying is that people ought to not do that, right? Like he's saying that insisting that people ought to be one way is bigotry and it's not good. If someone wants to support something else that's not what you want to support and not what you think people ought to support, that's their decision. And at the end of the day, the diversity that brings is the beauty of humanity. And if you don't like the beauty of humanity, well then like you're in a different world than us, right? Like now we're talking about a world where people are not free willing and people are not free thinking anymore, right? Now we're talking about a world where people's thoughts and their communications are. That is the apparent, and that's what I was trying. Like, and this is why I think Nietzsche is so important right now, because you could very easily think that people ought to say something that you agree with, like we're having environmental issues. People ought to be environmentally conscious, but that precludes people now from arguing against climate change. Not to say that we should allow people to deny climate change, but to say that there is a group of people that would like to do this with our environment to protect it and to do a better job of dealing with it. And then there's another group of people who'd rather do the other thing, right? And then saying that you ought to be one way and not the other. Well, you're now saying that you can't think the other thing, which is Nietzsche is kind of showing you that this leads to bigotry, because now you won't even hear what someone who doesn't agree with you wants to say, because your system is telling you, and your apparent world is telling you that everyone ought to think the way that you're thinking, so that they're the problem.
I think this is why we need rationality, right? I think this is part of the reason why we need that. Because when you start to forgo rationality, even if you reach happiness, like it will come at a cost, Well,
okay.
If everybody was rational, you'd be able to see that like completely turning off one opinion is just the incorrect way to do it, right? It's better to kind of teach people, it's better like if you always just make it seem like it has to be one way, eventually it'll get to the point where people don't even realize why it's that way.
Yeah.
And people should always know why climate change is, a bad thing, right? But if you always tell people, don't deny climate change. If you deny climate change, you're
part of the problem.
A bigot or whatever, right? Not to say that I disagree with climate change. Climate change is pretty obviously real, right? But if somebody wanted to, make a document that says this is why climate change is false, right? We would have should have to go through that. If it was like a popular document, whatever, we should have to go through that and point out the flaws in it, like why that's wrong, right?
Adam, I think you made a good point about reason and the importance of rationality. And to go back to that quote that we've been dealing with now for about 20 minutes, or that we talked about maybe 20 minutes ago, he says that happiness and instinct are one. He says that reason stands in opposition to instinct. However, he doesn't say that people should always be happy.
Exactly.
He doesn't say that people should not be reasonable. He doesn't
but
say
that is what like you would normally take from that. You know what I mean? If somebody's telling you, being rational means that you're opposing your own instinct, which is opposing your own happiness. Yeah. Why would anyone want to be rational at that point? I want to be happy. But you want to be happy?
If he truly meant that, he would have said it. He would have said.
That's kind of. But he's implying that in like a weird like Nietzsche way, because that's not really what he means, but that's a way to take it, right?
What he really means is that if you're looking for happiness, follow your instinct. And if you have too many reasons to not trust your instinct, well, understand that reasons stand in direct opposition to instinct. So you should value that, balance it like the scales of something, like the scales in your head. Balance reason and balance the happiness in your instinct. Because where that scale tapers off, and that middle ground is probably the best thing that you can do for yourself, while remaining rational, while following your instincts and being happy. That is where you live the best life. You don't live the best life being a hedonist, and you don't live the best life being a hermit who is too afraid to do anything for themselves.
That was Nietzsche, by the way.
It was Nietzsche.
Not like the aspect of not being able to do anything for himself.
He was
the aspect of too much rational thought, right?
But however, Adam, if you look at Nietzsche's life, you can't say that he wasn't instinctual. He wrote a book based on his instincts. He asked the same girl to marry him 3 times because instinctually he felt that she was the one. She didn't return that, but he knew. He in his own instinct, in his own heart, thought that she was the one. So you can't say that he was a hermit. Right. But he was a hermit while trying to follow his instincts, and his instincts failed. But his rationality, also didn't get in the way of him doing his instincts, which is to say that I think there is this meeting of rationality and happiness and instinct. And when you find that middle path, you find out how to follow your instincts in a rational way that makes you the best person possible. Okay, let's keep moving along.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Oh, Adam, you have something about Nietzsche and morality. So Adam had a quote here. The concept of morality becomes purely a means of control. The doctrine of will has been invented essentially for the purpose of punishment, that is, of finding someone guilty.
Where did I send you this?
I think maybe I sent you that, actually.
Yeah, I think this is your point.
That might have been one of the ones I sent you. So
I kind of want to find this. Can you send me that? Where's
it's somewhere in the Discord conversation that we had. But he says, in this light, the concept of morality becomes purely a means of control. The doctrine of will has been invented essentially for the purpose of punishment, that is, of finding someone guilty. So I think this goes up to him talking about religion and the apparent world, and that the religion in the apparent world has caused the apparent world to have this sense of morality. We have these things that we see as wrong. For example, stealing something is wrong, right? That is just across the board. If you take something from someone else, it's wrong. And that is something that religion and morality has brought to the world, because stealing was not always wrong. In fact, wrong wasn't always wrong. There was no wrong. And in fact, you could argue that there still isn't a wrong, right? Like when you look at the real world, there isn't a wrong. There just is and is, right? I know that's really abstract for people.
So basically, what he's trying to say is that the concept of morality is kind of phantom in a certain sense.
It is phantom, and it's a controlling hand.
We all think that we are moral creatures, but when it comes to defining what morality is and which actions morality would contain, it's tough to get everyone to agree, right? You look across cultures, tons of different things are moral to them, right? Each culture has a bunch of things that are moral to them that aren't moral to the next one, right?
So in our country of Canada, we have homeless people that are going starving on the streets of all of our major cities. Okay.
Yeah.
We have a company called Loblaws, for example, a grocery chain that's worth billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. Okay.
Really?
Yes, a lot.
That much? Like billions upon billions? Really?
Yes. No, well, that's not billions of billions. No, it's like tens of billions. They're worth like $40 billion or something like that.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, they're worth many, many billions, basically. So you have the poor people on one side who are struggling to even eat a night, and then you have a company with $40 billion now, right?
Yeah.
So does your morality tell you that the person who's struggling to eat deserves to eat food, and therefore whoever owns the $40 billion store, they should be able to steal from that store? Is that
wouldn't
moral?
Be wrong if you said yes. You wouldn't. I think that.
Is it more? Is it in a weird, messed up kind of way? Is it morally okay for a poor homeless person to steal food from a store that's corporation is worth like $40-50 billion? Is that okay? Morally?
This is why this is such a good example, because it shows the phantom content of morality, right?
Yes.
We'll all say that, sure, it's moral for the homeless person to go and steal from that Loblaws, right? But the problem is that the concept of morality is truly just a means of control, right?
Exactly.
It doesn't really exist. Loblaws, if Loblaws was the power of the governing nation, they would say homeless people are not allowed to steal from us because that is immoral, right? You see what I'm saying?
Exactly. And to go one step further,
because stealing's wrong, obviously.
Exactly.
And that makes it immoral, right?
To go one step further, though. A system where Loblaws, the store, can have $40 billion or whatever, how much it has, and in that very same system, a person can be homeless and not have any food.
Is that really moral? Yeah.
Isn't that really a moral system to begin with?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And that's
I'm
why,
agreeing
like,
with you. Yeah.
if you read Nietzsche, you start asking these questions. You're like, well, okay, in this world that I see, it's immoral to steal. Is it immoral for the homeless person to steal from the $1 billion corporation? Right. And it's like, well, that's kind of a gray area. And then Nietzsche will push you to ask the question of, well, why is that a gray area? Does morality really exist then? Or is it like this weird thing that you thought existed, but then your gut tells you something else? Because I'll tell you this, in my head, rationally, my rationality tells me that the homeless person stealing from the Loblaws is immoral because stealing is immoral. But in my heart, in my gut, I feel a homeless person has the right to eat and has a right to live. And a $1 billion corporation can handle losing $20 a day from a homeless person, right? That's my heart tells me that. That's my instincts that tell me that. So morality, we see it, but what we see is this phantom that Adam was saying. What we see is like what we think it is. And what it actually is probably a lot different than this beast that we see. And this beast that we see, this phantom that we see that is morality, has been created by hundreds of years of governments, hundreds of years of monarchies, thousands of years of religion. This has created the morality that we see today.
Into our heads that it exists, right?
It's morality it's a product of the power systems that we've had for thousands of years.
And as Nietzsche, and I think Nietzsche would think of it like it's just air, like it doesn't really exist. It's nothing. Like there is no real morality. I think that's what Nietzsche would argue.
I agree with that. There is,
and Nietzsche always goes crazy. Like he goes one step further here. He says the doctrine of will has been invented essentially for the purpose of punishment, that is, of finding guilty. Isn't he essentially saying that the whole concept of our will, like you will to do something, has been invented by the people, like by other people, with the purpose of punishing us or punishing anybody.
I think
that's like a crazy step.
I think it's the doctrine of will when relating to morality has been invented essentially for the purpose of punishment.
Well, what is will compared to morality?
No, like if you look at morality as a doctrine of will, it is one that has been invented.
I don't understand that. What do you mean by that?
I don't know. I that's how I kind of saw it, was that
I see it as him saying exactly what he's saying there, like the doctrine of will.
Well, so then what is the doctrine of will?
Like you will to do something. Like I need to go get some water. So in my head, it's like my will is I will get water.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. And then the system does not look for ways to tell you why you are innocent in getting water. The system looks for ways and to find that you are worthy of punishment for getting water. You understand?
Yeah, but that's what I'm trying to tell you. I'm trying to say, like, he goes the extra mile.
Right. Maybe you're right then. Maybe that's what he's trying to say.
But I also think that's kind of crazy, though. I don't necessarily agree with that.
I think Nietzsche is crazy. And
there is no doctrine of will. Like, I think will is just like part of something that makes us human, right? Like we have some things that we feel that we need to do, and it becomes almost like a will in our minds, right? And if that is really what he's talking about, it's impossible that could have possibly been invented essentially for the purpose of punishment. I don't believe that.
Oh my gosh, I'm just seeing here. We've got people actually chatting, and someone subs to us on Twitch. So thanks a lot, guys. Yeah, thanks a lot to Tim and Jay and my brother Matthew for stopping in. But yeah, so to get back on the chat about the doctrine of will, I think Nietzsche is nuts, dude. I think Nietzsche's nuts. I think that you don't have to agree on this. I think what he's trying to say is that we are more likely to punish someone. We are more likely to find a way to punish someone than we are likely to find a way to find that someone is innocent. I think he's trying to say
possible interpretation. I could just be interpreting it wrong. Right, like Nietzsche, it's another one of those translated texts, right? Yeah, it's hard to get these translated texts exact. Like that's why, like reading David Hume is so much easier because David Hume was like an Englishman, right? Yeah, it's so much easier to understand what he's saying because every word he says, I understand it completely, right? But with Nietzsche, it's tough, man. Nietzsche and Hegel and these other German and people of other languages, it's really tough to get exactly what they're saying.
So we can try our best. I think we're at your stuff now. I think we've finally arrived at the stuff that you sent me.
That stuff's kind of crazy.
You
But
ask me, so I'll read the quote that Adam
Sure.
sent me now. You ask me which of the philosophers' traits are most characteristic. For example, is it their lack of historical sense? Is it their hatred of the very idea of becoming? Is it their Egypticism? They think that they show their respect for a subject when they dehistorize
historicize.
it,
Yeah.
subspecie aeternitas.
Yeah,
And they turn it
we
into a
don't know.
mummy. So let's break down that first
Let me look up
line.
let me look up what this means. Let's see if I can find out
Subspecie
what this means.
aeternitas? Yeah, that's kind
Yeah,
of
let
an
me just see if I can
interesting.
find it. Let me see if I can find it.
It's kind of an interesting line. So just to read some of the comments here.
It's an honorific expression describing what is universally and eternally true. So it's like a priori true. It's like before. It's like eternally true. It's like a perspective that is eternally true.
Okay, so
that's
then what do you
interesting.
think this first line is saying?
I
Their
don't know.
lack of historical sense, their hatred of the very idea of becoming. Their
Oh,
Egypticism.
I think I know. I think I know what he's trying to say here.
Yes.
I think the idea is that what philosophers do is they take ideas, right?
Yeah.
And they take the idea out of its historical context and they make it into something that stands alone, right? But what
Yes.
Nietzsche is saying is that it's flawed in that one very way, in that things need their historical context.
Yeah. This goes back to the point he made about the Greeks.
He says when they turned into a mummy, everything that philosophers handled over the past thousands of years turned into concept mummies. Nothing real escaped their grasp alive. That's what he's saying. He's saying
Yeah.
that they almost killed every concept that they laid their hands on. I think this is crazy. I don't even think this is necessarily true, but it's something weird to think about, right?
It's a crazy idea, and I think you can even apply it to his take on the Greeks, right? Because he's trying to say like the Greeks thought that this was what it was. This is what things were, and the Greeks didn't mention in their books like this is what we think things are because we live in 1000 BCE and this in Athens is a shithole and this is happening and that is happening. They don't say that. They just think that this is our divine brain and this is what we think it is. And Nietzsche's trying to say like every single philosopher should have prefaced what they said by I live in this era and this is the crazy shit happening in my era and that is what led me to write this.
If we think about like the scientific things that were happening back in ancient Athens, like Aristotle was like he was like examining dead bodies trying to find out like how the heart worked, and when he finally mapped it all out, like he was completely wrong. Like he's just like he was like 100% wrong about like what was in the body, like what was going on, like what everything was doing, right?
Yeah, he's a philosopher.
But he was trying, like back then philosophy was science, right?
Yeah,
he was trying to like piece together the way the human body worked because he thought like he was really smart, right? And he was, but for some reason we take all of his philosophies out of their historical senses, historical context, right? But when we take out the stuff that he did about the human heart, like we'll say, oh, okay, it was just ancient Greece, right?
Yeah.
But you don't do that for his philosophy,
was ancient
right?
Greece. Like even his
But
philosophy.
we look at his philosophy like it's perfect, right? But in
Yes.
reality, the ancient Greek man has like a very simple mind in a sense where like he has a simple unified will, right?
Yes.
Like an ancient Greek philosopher has a simple unified will. It's like I want to find the truth about this, and he spends his whole life like talking to people and tries to figure it out, right? But if you take that in its historical context, you come to the conclusion like, okay, these dudes tried really hard, and some of them were like really intelligent, but they just didn't have enough information to come about these conclusions.
Which is exactly like what I think Nietzsche's trying to say. That he's trying to say like
I think so.
We don't look at philosophy and immediately think of the historical scenarios that these philosophers are currently in. Much like you and I are in a very certain scenario. Like, we have this pandemic that we're dealing with. This affects the way our brains think. We have this rampant virtualization of life. Schools becoming virtual, courts are becoming virtual, shopping is becoming a virtual experience, interactions becoming virtual, dating is becoming virtual, like everything is becoming virtual. We exist in this scenario, right? So when you and I talk about virtual and like the virtual and the online and the internet, it's like we have this historical backdrop that is influencing what we say. And if people were to look at us, 300 years from in the future and be like, oh, these two brothers were talking about this one thing, as a philosopher, it's easy not to admit that these are the things occurring and these are what are guiding or at least shaping and reflecting in my thoughts.
It's the idea of like blind sides, right? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like people always have like blind sides, right? You know what I mean? Like the ancient Greeks didn't know that much about like the way the world worked through science. Like they just like started to figure out that like everything was made up of atoms, and those guys like people barely even believed them, right? You know what I mean? Like they just have so many blind sides, and all their information it's not like infallible, right?
Yeah.
Like even our information, we have certain blind sides that our age kind of gives us, right? Like maybe
Of course.
people 200 years from now, like Hegel has this idea of like, so like as a philosopher in your current age, you start on the backs of the people who came before you. And
Yes.
even if you know you like you aren't that smart or whatever, if you read and know enough, you start on the backs of everyone else. And even if you're like a dwarf on the back of a giant, you'll still see a little bit higher, right?
Exactly.
That's something I think my professor said.
So,
and it really made me think. It's like it's true, right?
It is true.
And that's kind of what I think Nietzsche is saying here a little bit. It's like they just didn't know that much.
So now let's take your example and let's get crazy with it, right? Mm-hmm. So you are only like you are now standing or sitting on the back of somebody that came before you, right? Mm-hmm. So let's have this example fleshed out. For example, Adam really likes or really wants to understand Kant, right? He really likes Kant, Immanuel Kant. So Adam wants to write a paper about Kant or in a response to Kant or something like that, right? In doing so, Adam is theoretically standing or sitting on Kant's shoulders and seeing a new world while using Kant's understanding of it, right? Mm-hmm. But what if you take Nietzsche's understanding of this and you drill down deeper, right? Mm-hmm. Because Kant was sitting on the shoulders of somebody else.
Oh yeah,
sitting on the shoulders of somebody
else.
Whole
idea.
And this thing goes all the way down. And what Nietzsche's trying to say is, at the bottom of where everything goes down, is a presupposition that there is this apparent world that there doesn't have to be. That's what he's,
now you lost me.
What are you saying?
I
think what he's trying to say is at the bottom of this, this chain of events is a presupposition that the Greeks make that like life is worthless. Or that like mainly that life is worthless, right? And that like life is without meaning, right? Because that kind of starts somewhere and then everything kind of piggybacks on the top of that, right? But what if that was one mistake? What if there was any mistakes that someone made at the bottom? What you have in a system like that is the people who make like really massive abstract mistakes at the bottom end up dooming the rest of the people above them to likely make the same logical mistakes. So the mistake that like human life is worthless is like a mistake that we've been thinking about for thousands of years. Why couldn't we just start by saying that all human life is sacred and all human life
I kind of disagree with that. I kind of disagree with that idea.
So here's how I see that idea. I see it as any human that wants their life to have meaning can find a way to give their life meaning. That's how I see it. If you exist in this world and you are human and you want to have meaning, there is a path for you somewhere in life that will give you the meaning that you so desire. And the path is different if you're living, on the streets of Mumbai than it is if you're living in the Hollywood Hills. The path is different. But if you really want to find meaning out of whatever lottery ticket you got in this world that we have, in this life that we have, you have to follow that. There is a path for you somewhere, right? And I think what Nietzsche would say is that people who think of life as worthless are merely people who have worthwhile lives that are choosing not to act on it, or have instincts that they have instincts, for example, that their reasons are making them not follow or not do. Because you can think of 1,000 more reasons to not do something than you can think of one reason to do something. That's how our brain works.
I mean, the final maxim in Nietzsche's Maxims and Arrows from his book, The Twilight of the Idols, I think, is formula of my happiness: a yes, a no, a straight line, a goal. That's basically exactly what you're saying, right?
I am.
Like that's the way he thinks about it too. Like to him, like his happiness was rooted in him having a goal and kind of knowing what he wanted. And I think what he wanted was to start us questioning some of the things that we thought philosophy gave us. Like I think that's a lot of what Nietzsche, and it's not just philosophy, it's also like religion, which could also be called as like a sort of philosophy, right?
Religion is a sort of philosophy. Like almost anything can be slotted into the philosophical realm, right?
And Nietzsche just wants us to kind of question those, I think.
Question why are we doing this? Why is it this way? Right? And I think this next quote that you sent us is perfect for this. He says
I think I already said that one.
No. You said one of them, but I have another one.
Okay,
I have
go
one
on,
ready
go
to
on.
go.
Sorry.
Whenever these venerable concept idolaters revere something, they kill it and stuff it. What that means is whenever these people that are pushing these concepts respect another concept, to make them happy, they see the concept that they respect, and their goal is to kill it and stuff it. So basically, like, think of like a hunter. A hunter sees a beautiful deer, a beautiful moose, and what is the hunter's action to the beautiful moose? They want to kill it and stuff it so that they can always see the beautiful moose, right? And then, like, what is an environmentalist's reaction to the beautiful moose? Well, they want to make sure that the moose has an ecosystem that it can live a long and happy life in, right? There's different like ways of approaching something, and how philosophers approach philosophy is that when they see something that they like, much like the hunter, they kill it and they stuff it, they suck the life out of it, and then they hang it on the wall. And he says, death, change, old age, as well as procreation and growth are to their own minds objections, even refutations. Whatever has being does not become. Whatever becomes does not have being.
That's weird.
No, but I think I get it.
Whatever has being does not become.
If you have being, you don't become anything. You already are. Mm-hmm. And then if you are becoming something, then you are no longer being, because being is in the present. Being is,
I think that what Nietzsche means here is about kind of. I think I talked to you about this. The idea of, killing the part of yourself that you don't like and seeing what grows in its place.
Yeah, that's
the idea of becoming, right? And once you find that true reality that exists within you, that's your being, right?
Yes.
I think that's kind of how I understand. That's the only possible way I can understand that. Like, as regards to ideas, I don't know how ideas could have being or becoming. I don't really understand that. But death, change, old age, growth, as objections is funny if you think about it, right?
I don't get that part.
He's still talking about the idea, I think, and he's trying to say, like, when you kill it and stuff it, like, you don't think about all these things that are changing around you, and you just think about your idea that is like stuffed and like on your wall or whatever,
Yeah.
The idea that we take Socrates's or like Plato's ideas and we think, oh, this is marvelous, right?
Because it was
in reality
marvelous.
It's an ancient Greek deer, right?
It is an ancient Greek.
We just happen to like it. It doesn't live anymore.
That's exactly.
It doesn't live. Dude, it doesn't live anymore.
That's perfect. All of it, Plato and Socrates is an ancient Greek deer, and you can be a philosopher and want to kill it and hang it or hang it or whatever you want to do, or you can choose to be a Nietzschean philosopher. Like, you can choose to follow Nietzsche's school of thought, which is to understand that in how it existed. Like, understand the Greek philosophy in the same sense that you understand Greek history, because the two are actually one. They are the same. They're not different. The history and the philosophy, they feed into each other. And to only take one, well, you're only getting one part of the sandwich at that point, right? Mm-hmm. He gets even crazier with this quote, because he says again, whatever has being does not become. Whatever becomes does not have being. Now they all believe, desperately even, in what has being. But since they never grasp what has being, they seek the reasons as to why being is kept away from them. His quote, there must be mere appearance. There must be some deception which prevents us from perceiving that which has being. Where is that deceiver?
I think I understand this.
I understand it too.
Wait, what do you think this means? I think we're gonna have vastly different ideas as well.
I think it's time
this
for you to go
is a very
first.
philosophical thing.
I think it's time for you to go first.
Time for me to go first?
Yeah.
I think what he's talking about here is the idea that philosophers always argue about whether we can truly know the things around us. I think that's what he's trying to say. He's like, because philosophers will always they would wonder, why is something being kept from me? Like, why is the thing that created this universe keeping me from knowing the truth of my existence? Like, the things that I see around me, I don't know that they necessarily look the way they do, or I don't know that they necessarily are the way they seem to me, right? But
okay. What if the deceiver is yourself?
Yeah.
Do you think that?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, that's kind of what he's saying.
I think the great deceiver is yourself. I think the great deceiver is yourself because you are deceiving yourself by thinking that the world operates in the way that the apparent world looks like it operates, right? Like, you see government and you see business.
I think you're coming at it from a political lens. I don't think he means it politically. I think he means it actually.
I think
because he read Kant, right? He read Kant. Yourself. Think about that.
Okay.
He probably read Kant.
Of course he did.
So when he reads Kant, he's like, this guy's desperately looking for a way to ground things that could just be mere appearances, right? He's trying to find a way to ground them. And Nietzsche talks a lot of smack on Kant. It's actually really funny. But I don't have the exact quotes on it. Maybe we can get to that at a different time. But
yeah,
he seems to think that there might not be something out there that's not the direct appearance, right? It's possible that we're simply just being deceived or something like that, right?
Yeah. But I don't know. For some reason, how I see this is, I think ultimately we are the ones deceiving ourselves for allowing ourselves to believe that the apparent world is the reality. That's how because I'm looking at Nietzsche as like a sum of all the parts. Like, instead of looking at not only looking at each line separately, but then looking at each line in relationship to the other things that we've also talked about today that were all from the same book. So just as a note for everybody watching up to this point, first off, thank you for watching the Bruni Brocast. This has been a pretty in-depth episode about Nietzsche. But this, all that we're talking about is from Nietzsche's book, Twilight of the Idols.
Twilight of Idols, or maybe
Twilight of the Idols, or Twilight of Idols. Regardless, it's all from there. And
Twilight of the Idols.
And what I'm trying to say is that I think that a lot of his lines here, you can understand them separate of each other, but you can also understand them as one whole essay where he's trying to teach us something. And I think if we were to get one, for me at least, when I was reading this, the one thing that I got was we see this apparent world. We see this apparent world because we don't necessarily want to see the real world, or because we don't know how. It's one of the two things. Either we know how to see the real world and we don't want to because it's scary, and it is scary, or it is that we just don't know how to see the real world because we haven't questioned enough, right? It's one of those two things. So then what he says is, there must be some deception which prevents us from perceiving the truth, essentially. Like why, he says, if the truth is out there and it's open to everyone, why doesn't everyone see the truth? And his argument now is that if the truth was truly out there, everyone should be able to see it. So then, therefore, there has to be a deception. There has to be a deceiver who is deceiving us so that this obvious truth that, to Nietzsche, this truth is obvious. And to me as well, I think I might not have the same truth as Nietzsche has, but I think that also this truth is obvious, the truth of this real world. Because when we look at morality, that's what it tells us. It tells us that, in the system that we live in, we have homeless people that are going to steal for food, and we have billionaires that won't need food for, several lifetimes. They'll never have to question anything, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
the fact that we have systems like that means that our system doesn't make sense. Because if our system made sense, we wouldn't have the homeless, and to not have the homeless, we wouldn't have the billionaires either, and we'd all be in this like happy middle ground.
A system is simply an appearance of a system. It's not really a system.
Okay, so then who is the deceiver? Is the deceiver the people who are making the image of this apparent world, the powers that be that are pushing this apparent world on us, or
it's our perception of life itself?
Exactly. Is the deceiver ourselves and our perception of just not questioning the powers? And I think Nietzsche would agree with us. I think Nietzsche would agree in saying that this great deceiver...
Maybe not. Who knows?
I mean, I hope that he would. And
a lot of... You'd be surprised, Stephen. A lot of people, when they read Nietzsche, they get completely different ideas from it. It really does kind of spark... it's almost like a painting. It does kind of spark what you want to see in it.
I guess this is what I want to see in it.
Dude,
what I want to
you should read some other people, like what they think about it. It's crazy. It's really not a lot like what we're saying right now. But it does seem like this is what he's saying, and I would agree with you. But I don't know what else people would think.
Who else could deceive 7 billion people?
In the chat, tell us what you think this actually means.
Yeah, if you're watching up to this point, the quote
because it'd be interesting, right? It'd be interesting to see what other people thought, right?
Yeah, let's see what you got. If you guys are reading right now, this is the quote. There must be mere appearance. There must be some deception which prevents us from perceiving that which has being. Where is the deceiver? So chat, feel free to chime in. Let us know, like, what do you think the deceiver is? For me, again, I think that who could deceive 7 billion people better than themselves and their own, desire to have the right answer as to what the world is? Is it easier to think that you know the world, or is it easier to think that you don't know the world? The answer is it's easier to think that you know the world. Of course. Yeah. And that is the deceiving. That is the deceiver. Because you have this positive feedback loop, because it's easier to think that you know something than it is to think that you don't know something. You're deceiving yourself from realizing what actually could be existing all around you, and the anarchy that is the human, real, physical world that we live in. It's a friggin' rock with 8 billion humans and, countless billions of other creatures on it. That is the reality of where we're living. And somehow, we made governments and we made buildings and we made laws and we did all these different things, but that doesn't stop the fact that we're on a rock in front of a sun. And
Stephen has a tough it's a tough proposition for you to leave Jean Baudrillard out of things for like one episode. It seems really tough for you.
I know.
but it's exactly what we're talking about, just a simulacrum idea, right?
It's a simulacrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think Nietzsche also speaks of this simulacrum. He doesn't use the same wording, but he's saying that same thing. What is deceiving us? And Jean Baudrillard is saying the same thing. You are deceiving yourself by just thinking that you understand the world because you can look around. In fact,
part of me also wonders how many episodes you can go until you don't mention Jean Baudrillard.
Probably none of them. I mean,
I hope that we go 50 episodes, and every single one of them at one point
bring it back to
the simulacrum idea, because the simulacrum idea is kind of crazy, right?
It was so integral to my personal journey with philosophy. Truly,
it's part of your coming of age. It was part of your coming of age.
Yeah, definitely part of my coming of age.
It just was, and things that are part of your coming of age matter a lot to you. It was part of my coming of age too, which is why I think I see this last passage in a very similar way to what you see. Like, I see it almost the same way. Like, the mere appearances are ourselves deceiving ourselves, right?
Yes.
Because like, even from my philosophical knowledge, like, how do we know that the things we see around us are true, right? Like, we just don't. So
we could all be in a friggin' simulation. Like, people have flown that kind of shit around. Like, you can fly an argument for like almost anything. Like, or a simulation. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that.
And the mind is like creating all these images, right? So the mind is truly the only possible thing that could be deceiving you. Or you believe in like maybe some universal power like God that could be like deceiving us for some reason. I don't know.
God wouldn't deceive.
Or maybe there's no deception. Maybe we're presupposing deception doesn't exist.
I don't think that's true. I think there is a deception. I think
lots of people watching probably might think to themselves, what is being deceived? Right? I can see that being the case. Like, lots of people thinking that. I even kind of think that too myself. What's being deceived?
Well, you can look at current events as to think of like what is being deceived. Deception is the name of the game right now. Like if you thought about like the 60s, the 1960s, the 1970s were the era of like nuclear proliferation and mutually assured destruction. It's like the 2010s and the 2020s, it looks like now. I mean, we can only argue from the past year, looks like it's now the age of disinformation and deception. You know, before it was, I'm going to fight my enemy by making a weapon that can destroy his entire country, and therefore they won't mess with me. And I'm going to keep threatening. Like, well, you want to do that? I can nuke you. Okay, we'll back off, right? And now it's, enough people in the world have nukes now, so it's not even a big deal. It's like when everyone has a car, having a car isn't a big deal. Now having a car is a necessity. Exactly. 80 years ago, having a car was a complete luxury. Now it's almost a necessity, right? So now it's like having nukes is like a necessity. And
a phone too.
So where do you turn to? And now what countries have it looks like where countries have turned to is spreading disinformation in other countries to try and topple them all. To try and get us to disagree with each other, to try and get us to think that disagreeing is this inherently evil thing, and it means that we hate each other. When really, if I disagree with you and I like come out and like actually have a discussion with you about why I disagree with you, it's probably because I love you. It's probably because maybe I don't love you. Maybe I care enough about you that I want you to see things in a different way. So that you can be more educated, and then I want to see things your way so that I can be more educated. I'm not doing it because I don't care about you. I'm doing it because I care about you.
Oh my gosh.
What?
No, it's just funny.
It's the truth though, dude. We have to stop. Like every time someone disagrees with someone now, it's like it's a Twitter war, it's a flame war. Everyone's like,
I think disagreeing is healthy
against the other one.
I think disagreeing is healthy.
It is healthy. And at the end of the day, if you have the right people disagreeing with you, they're doing it out of a place of care. And I think what we all need to learn is, as an entire species right now, especially with the internet where we can talk with virtually anyone at any time, is that we're all humans and we should all care about making each other better. And not necessarily better. Better doesn't mean agreeing with me, right? Because you can disagree with me and you can still be better. Better means that even if you disagree with me, now you're disagreeing with me because you truly understand my position and not because you just disagree with me. Right? Which makes you a smarter person and makes me a smarter person at the end of the day. Because if you can say at the end of the day, you listened to Adam and I talk for an hour and a half and you say, I disagree with them. It's like, at least you listened to us for an hour and a half and you know where we're coming from.
Put in the comments why you disagree with us.
Yeah, throw it up in the comments. Why do you disagree with us? You should disagree with us. You're not allowed.
I will analyze your argument next episode.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to stop it, guys. Anything else to add?
We will. If someone from somewhere put a comment disagreeing with us, we would analyze that shit. And you know what? Maybe we'd say, this guy's just smarter than us.
Dude, I hope
this person's just smarter than us.
I hope one day that we get a comment and someone's like just smarter than us.
I'm not the smartest person.
Exactly.
Yeah, they've just like read Nietzsche all their life. They're like, you guys are just interpreting completely
stupid.
I'm like, okay, true. I mean, I just read like one of his books like over the winter break.
I just
read
a couple possible
that
articles.
Everything I'm saying is wrong. Do I think I'm right? Yeah, for now.
For now,
we'll see where that goes, though, right?
Okay, to lead everyone off.
Right? It's like, until someone proves me wrong. Until I read something that makes me think I'm wrong, I'm right. And I feel like everyone feels that way too.
Oh, absolutely. That's
why like.
That's why Nietzsche's talking about this kind of stuff.
That's why only seeing things that agree with you. Mm-hmm.
I think there's a little bit of lag, Adam.
Things that agree with you makes you. Oh, sorry. Oh,
no,
yeah.
It's not your fault. We're going to leave it off with one quote by Nietzsche. And we've already said this quote before in the episode, but I'm going to bring it up one last time. I mistrust all systematizers and avoid them. The will to a system is a lack of integrity. And I'd like you to think about this quote and think about tribalization, think about the idea of the left versus the right, and think about the idea, so systematizers and will to a system, and think about the left versus the right. Are these just people who have willed away their own free will to a system of left or right, and now these systems are telling them to go to war with each other, and now they feel that because they willed their own will to the system, and the system's telling them to go to war over their ideas, now they have to go to war, right?
And in reality, you have to understand why that leads to a loss of integrity. I think that's really important too.
Because no system will fully encompass you ever. And one thing, I mean, I'm a law student, and I have to say that at least once an episode, just like I have to reference John the Driller.
everyone, take it down. It's like, okay, third episode where we mentioned he's a law student, and he mentioned John Baudrillard's simulacrum. Okay, from here to 50, from here to episode 50, every single time.
But as a law student, I say all the time, you are your own best advocate. You. Like when I was working in Detroit in the courtrooms there, it's like, I would tell my clients there, like, if you don't tell me everything about you, about your family, about like how you were like what's going on in your life right now, about what happened with this whole criminal incident, if you don't tell me the whole thing, how can you expect me to care enough to help you, to have enough information to help you? It's like, I don't know what you went through. I am not your advocate until you make me, like, you are your own advocate, and then I'm your advocate later. Like, because, you know, Italians call lawyers avvocato. So I'm like, when you are your best advocate, then I am your best advocate. But don't forget that to will your own free will to a system is not being your own best advocate, because now you're saying that
to bind your own free will to system.
Bind your
the word will twice. To bind your will to a system.
To bind your will to a system, you're now saying that I am not my own best advocate. This system of ideas is my best advocate.
Therefore, this system of ideas is my integrity. Therefore, I don't have integrity.
That sounds easy, but does that sound right? Ask that question to yourself. Exactly. Answer that question in the comments. And you know what? In a couple of weeks, we'll be back with episode 4.
And nobody's a systematizer, and we're both wrong.
We're all wrong. Everybody's wrong. Everybody.